Howdy. You know, over the course of time, I have probably done about 20 or 25 TED Talks and TEDx Talks. And during that time, I've watched them go from being something where each one seemed a revelation to, and I present company accepted, please, where the form had become as rigid as a sonnet, and the likelihood of anything spontaneous happening was about as great as it was at the Republican National Convention until Clint Eastwood brought in a chair. This is actually in case I want to sit down, though. I don't have anybody in that chair, you'll be pleased to know. But in thinking about open and thinking about the way in which TED Talks have become so stylized, it occurred to me that an adventuresome thing for me to do would be to come out here with as little knowledge of what I was about to say as I could possibly. Now, that's hard to do, you know. You've really got to work at it. And right at sort of the last moment, I gave myself an out. But this is actually kind of a cheap trick out. But I want you to listen very carefully to this quote by Franz Kafka. "You need not leave your room. Remain sitting at your table and listen. You need not even listen. Simply wait. You need not even wait. Just learn to become quiet and still and solitary. The world will freely offer itself to you. Unmasked. It has no choice. It will roll in ecstasy at your feet." That's a cheap trick, though. But it'd be interesting to see what would happen over the course of 15 minutes and 35 seconds. I'd have to make people put away their cell phones, I'll tell you that. No, so what I think I'll do is tell a story, and I'm actually just going to grab one. This is also risky. I'm going to grab the first one that comes into my head. That's interesting. Okay. Back when I was in the process of giving up what I'd been doing, which was being a cattle rancher in Wyoming, and becoming what I became, which was, I don't know what to call it yet, an internet guru, I guess. Though they don't even call it that anymore. I was driving back and forth between Wyoming and California maybe 20 times a year. My wife called it the Memorized Nevada Project. And I kept trying to find other ways to cross the Great Divide Basin. And I was exploring one of those other ways on a September night, September evening, late in the afternoon and late in September, and it was cold. And I was driving through a place called Fallon, Nevada. And Fallon, Nevada is notable mostly for being the place where the Miramar Naval Air Station kids do their Top Gun training, because they can rage around at very high rates of speed and not do much except break jackrabbit eardrums. And there was a guy who looked like hell sitting on the edge of town, had a sign that said, "Anywhere but here." And I'm thinking, well, you know, he probably doesn't mean Eureka, Austin, or Ely. He probably means Salt Lake City, which is about 700 miles away. So if I take this fella on, I'm going to have him all night. But I take him on. And he gets in the car, and he looks even worse than he did by the road, and he smells a lot worse. But a weird feeling of peace comes over me as soon as he gets in the car, and I feel perfectly okay about having him there. And we start talking, and it turns out that he was born the day before I was, literally the day before I was, in kind of a tough part of Queens. And he'd gone off to Vietnam, and he'd been shot up and messed up, and had come back with a psychological disability and a physical disability, and had been more or less making it in New York City. He had a cab driver's license, and he actually was a good enough saxophone player so that he played session gigs. And he had an apartment, and he had a girlfriend, he had a functional life. He was a little odd, but things had been working for him. And at one point, his landlord quit giving him hot water to his apartment. And since he was a little bit sideways, he quit paying rent, thinking that was not the right thing to do. So he comes home one night, and his door has been padlocked 3 different ways. All of his stuff is gone. His girlfriend is nowhere to be found. His hack license was inside. His saxophone was inside. And moreover, the landlord, in a particular fit of ugliness, has informed the Veterans Administration that he's dead. And he has no identification. And in that moment, he falls down through the cracks. And this had happened a couple of years before I met him. And I said, "So you're homeless?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, what are you doing out here?" And he said, "Just because I'm homeless doesn't mean I can't take a vacation." Solid point. I said, "Well, why didn't you just stay in San Francisco?" And he said, I don't know how to be homeless in San Francisco. I know how to be homeless in New York." Again, it was hard to argue. And we talked about things, and I found him to be lucid and interesting. And in Austin, Nevada, I stopped for gas, and it was one of those sort of Baghdad Cafe kind of gas stations with the tumbleweeds and everything. And I got out of the car, went in to pay for the gas, and I saw my passenger get out of the car and scribble something on a piece of paper and put it in the coin return slot of what was, they still had phone booths in those days, kind of quaint now, but put it in the coin return slot of the phone booth, out in the corner of the lot. And so I took a pass by there, and I grabbed it out, and it was a little note that said, "Love forgives everything." And I got back in the car and drove for a while, and I said, "Why did you put that note in the coin return slot there?" And he said, "Well, I figured somebody'd be looking for money and get my note instead." And I said, "Yeah, right. But what motivated you to write, 'Love forgives everything'?" And he said, "Well, it does." And I said, "Well, that's a tall bar for it, but yeah, I guess so. I mean, but this means, this seems like a prayer or something. Did you have a very religious sense of things?" And he said, "Oh, yeah." And I said, "So you have a very personal God?" He said, "Yep." And I said, "Well, if you'll pardon me, your personal God that you're serving in this very humble way seems to be treating you like shit, whereas I am doing okay, and I don't have this." And he said, "Well, you know, every soul comes into the world to take a curriculum, and some of us are taking basket weaving, and some of us are taking Astrophysics 406. And I'm pleased to be taking the harder courses. Which, next time you find yourself in trouble, is something to think about. Because there's this weird notion of karma that is precisely the opposite of that. And I think he's actually closer to being on to something. But I didn't think about it a lot until some years later, and I'll cut quickly. Some years later, I fell in love like they do in the movies or operas. And I was deliriously, insanely, dangerously in love for a year until one night, 2 days before her 30th birthday, I put her on an airplane in L.A., and she died on the way to New York, just dropped dead, completely surprisingly. She'd been having premonitions that I was going to die, so she was sort of right. And suddenly I felt like I was taking harder courses, much harder courses. And I had to go through this period of thinking that this was just like a harsh, meaningless, horrible manifestation of all the rattling and banging of senseless chaos, or it actually meant something and it happened to me for a reason. And I decided that it had happened to me for a reason. What was that? And I thought, well, if it happens to me for a reason, it means that there is a soul, maybe. That the soul comes into the world, that the hitchhiker was right, that I have one, that she had one. Well, why would the soul come into the world? What would be the point of that? And suddenly it became very clear to me that the reason the soul comes into the world is so that love will make sense, so that love will have a context, so that love will have the frame of fear and doubt and decay and the Republican Party and nuclear weapons and, you know, the terrible inner self-loathing that each of us carries around for no good reason, which is my idea of original sin. And that we are all volunteers here. That we come into the world from the other side, which is entirely made of love, where it's all open and couldn't be opener, into this place of constricture and containment and closure and dogma and terror. And we fight with our hearts in the high mountains of the Afghanistan of the soul in order for love to make sense. And by not giving up, and by not thinking the worst of ourselves or others, and mostly to the extent that we're capable of doing it, by learning how to actually accept love from other people, we win that battle for every soul born and unborn. And that is why we were here. Now, I've met one person in my whole life who I really think is fluidly capable of accepting love. He is Gilberto Gil, and this is handy for him because he's the most beloved person in the most loving country on the planet. He's a singer from Brazil, and I spent a lot of time with him, and I've probably taken 3,000 photographs with other people's cameras of him hugging some person in Brazil and meaning it, but meaning it mostly by receiving it. And so I guess the thing that I have to say about openness, and I honestly did not know, truthfully, did not know that this was the story I was going to tell you. I'm glad I didn't find myself talking about the end of monotheism, which was what I was thinking I was going to talk about. That was the dying dinosaur. I mean, monotheism is on its last legs and is behaving very badly as it dies. These things do not go down slow, and we are in a contained space. It will take a lot of love to get through this. Truly. And much better filmmaking. No, I think what it'll take to get through this dark time in human history is really for us to become very, very focused on allowing ourselves to find ourselves worthy, to make ourselves open to the love that all of us actually deserve.